He had buried his tears years ago, after the land took his wife and the silo took his brother. Silence became his armor, work his only prayer. But on a cold Iowa evening, when his black horse crumpled in the dust, the vow shattered. That night was not just about saving an animal. It was about unearthing secrets, breaking silence, and discovering whether love could still be stronger than loss. The late October sun sank low over the endless cornfields of Iowa, painting the horizon in shades of burnt orange and dusty gold. Jack Miller stood at the edge of his property, his boots half buried in the dry stubble left behind by harvest. The air was sharp, with the smell of husks and diesel, and the silence of the fields pressed against him like an unwelcome memory. For most men in the county, this was the season of rest, a time to look forward to Thanksgiving dinners and family gatherings. For Jack, it was just another reminder of how empty the farmhouse had become. His hands were still rough with work, veins raised under the tan of too many summers spent under a hard sun. 52 years had carved lines deep into his face, not from laughter, but from endurance. Once, his wife had said those lines made him look strong. Now, they only made him look tired. Since June had passed, the house had become too quiet, and since Ben's accident in the grain silo, it felt as though even the land had turned its back on him. Jack carried those ghosts the way other men carried tools, close, heavy, unspoken. The black horse in the corral, Cole, shifted uneasily on his feet. His coat caught the fading light like polished obsidian, a sight that once filled Jack with pride. Tonight, though, Cole's movements seemed fragile, as if the weight of years pressed on his back as much as it did on Jack's shoulders. Jack leaned against the weathered fence, arms crossed, telling himself it was just the season, just the chill in the air making the animal restless. But deep down, he knew better. Cole had always been more than a horse. He was a mirror, a silent witness to every heartbreak Jack had buried beneath layers of dust and silence. And then it happened. Cole staggered, his knees buckling into the dirt with a sound that seemed louder than thunder. Jack's chest clenched. The horse's breath came in ragged bursts, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with something Jack recognized instantly: fear. For a moment, Jack couldn't move. The world shrank to that one image, the proud black horse folded into the dust, the animal that had carried him through endless fields now collapsing, as though the earth had betrayed them both. The smell of dry soil rose sharply as Jack stumbled forward, his boots kicking up clouds that clung to his jeans. He dropped to his knees beside Cole, hands trembling as he reached for the animal's neck. The heat of the horse's skin radiated against his palm, damp with sweat. Cole lowered his head, pressing his muzzle weakly into the dirt, and Jack's throat closed. He had promised himself, after Ben's funeral, after June's quiet passing, that no more tears would ever fall. He had sworn it to the night sky, to the silence of his empty house, to the land that had taken everything from him. But here, in the fading light, the vow shattered. His voice cracked into a whisper, barely audible above the faint rustle of dried corn stalks. "Don't do this to me, boy. Don't leave me too." The words broke open a dam he had held for years. A single tear cut down his dust-covered cheek, warm against the cold October air. Cole's body shivered, legs sinking deeper into the dirt, and Jack pulled the horse closer, his forehead pressed against the coarse mane. He didn't care who saw him. For the first time in a decade, his body yielded to grief, raw and unhidden. Behind him, the wind shifted, carrying the sound of a truck engine approaching down the gravel road. Jack didn't look up. He stayed on his knees in the corral, cradling the horse that had never left his side, whispering the words he thought he had buried forever. I swore I'd never cry again. And yet, under the fading October sky, with Cole trembling against him, Jack cried. The growl of the approaching truck cut through the stillness of the farmyard, its headlights sweeping across the barn wall like restless ghosts. Jack didn't move at first. His knees were still pressed into the dirt beside Cole, his hand firm against the horse's damp neck. The sound of the engine slowed, tires crunching against gravel until it stopped just outside the corral. A door opened, then shut with a quiet finality. Footsteps followed, measured, confident, yet cautious, as if the person knew instinctively not to rush into the weight of someone else's grief. Jack finally lifted his head. Dust clung to his cheek, where the tear had carved its path, and his eyes caught the figure stepping out of the fading light. She wasn't dressed like the other locals. Her jeans were clean, boots polished, and the dark jacket she wore looked more suited for a veterinary clinic than a farmyard. The woman carried a leather satchel, its straps worn but cared for, and a stethoscope hung loosely around her neck. Her black hair was pulled back neatly, strands catching the last rays of the setting sun. "Mr. Miller?" Her voice was steady, soft, but with a quiet authority that made even the restless horse still for a moment. Jack squinted at her, trying to place the face. "Who's asking?" His voice came out rough, frayed from years of silence and the strain of the last few minutes. She stepped closer to the fence, her boots pressing lightly into the gravel. "Ava Nguyen, county vet. Miguel called me." Jack exhaled, though it was hardly relief. He turned his gaze back to Cole, brushing dirt from the horse's muzzle with trembling hands. "Don't need a stranger telling me what I already know." Ava's eyes lingered on Cole, on the trembling in his flanks, the way the horse pressed his weight into the ground as if surrendering. She moved slowly, unhurried, and crouched a few feet away. From her satchel, she pulled a small flashlight, its beam sweeping across Cole's pupils. The horse flinched, but didn't resist. Ava murmured something in a low voice, words not meant for anyone else but the animal. Behind the fence, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the sound of the truck by curiosity, by the sight of Jack Miller on his knees in the dirt. Their faces hovered like shadows in the twilight, hats pulled low, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in sympathy or judgment. No one spoke. In rural Iowa, silence was its own kind of respect. Ava adjusted the stethoscope against her ears, pressed it gently to Cole's chest. She listened, brow furrowed, then leaned back, resting her hand on the horse's neck. His heart's working harder than it should, breathing shallow, but steady. It's not just exhaustion. Her eyes flicked briefly to Jack, sharp enough to cut through the distance between them. Something's weighing on him. Jack bristled. He's a horse, not a man. And yet, Ava replied softly, they carry more of us than we like to admit. The words landed heavy. Jack turned his face away, jaw tight. He hated how easily she had reached inside, naming something he refused to say aloud. Cole shuddered beneath his hand, as if echoing her point. From the fence line, Miguel's voice carried low, roughened by the evening air. "Let her do her job, Jack." Jack closed his eyes, his hand sliding down Cole's mane. He remembered a time when his wife would have said the same thing. when Ben would have cracked a joke to ease the tension. Now there was only this woman, a stranger from the city, her hands steady on the creature Jack loved most. Ava worked with precision, checking the horse's legs, the tremor in his muscles, the tension along his spine. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, dust settling gently around her. "I can't give you an answer tonight," she said. "Not one that matters. But I'll tell you this much. He's not ready to leave you. Not yet." Jack swallowed hard, his throat aching as if her words had torn through something raw. He almost spoke, almost asked the question burning in his chest, but instead he pressed his forehead against Cole's neck. The horse exhaled, a long, weary sigh, and for a moment, the world stilled. Ava rose, brushing the dust from her jeans. Her gaze lingered on Jack, not with pity, but with recognition. "You don't have to carry it all alone," she said simply. Then she turned toward her truck, boots crunching softly in the gravel, leaving her words hanging in the cooling air. Jack remained where he was, on his knees in the dirt, Cole's head heavy against his lap. The neighbors began to drift away, their murmurs fading into the night, until the farmyard was quiet again. The stars were coming out, pale at first, then bright against the black sky. Jack lifted his eyes briefly, as though daring heaven to answer. It didn't. His hand traced slow circles along Cole's neck, and he whispered so low it was almost lost to the night. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." But deep inside, Jack feared she did. The farmhouse was quiet that night, the kind of silence that made the walls seem thinner, the memories louder. Jack Miller sat at the kitchen table long after Ava's truck disappeared down the gravel road. The overhead light hummed faintly, casting a pale circle across the scarred wood surface. His supper plate was untouched, potatoes congealed, roast beef cold, the smell of black coffee lingering faintly. He pushed it aside and reached for the bottle of bourbon sitting near the sink. His hand lingered there, fingers tapping against the glass, but he didn't pour. Not tonight. The weight in his chest was already heavy enough. Through the window above the sink, the corral lay in shadow. Cole was still down, resting in the straw Ava had spread, his sides rising and falling with shallow breaths. Jack's eyes followed the outline of the barn beyond, its wooden slats leaning under the strain of years. In that barn, in a chest beneath a stack of rusted tools, lay a piece of his past he hadn't touched in nearly a decade. A door he refused to open. He rose, grabbing his coat from the hook by the back door. The hinges groaned when he stepped outside, the October air sharp against his face. The sky was clear, and stars spilled across it like scattered grain. His boots crunched against gravel, then softened on dirt as he crossed toward the barn. Cole lifted his head slightly when Jack passed, eyes glinting faintly in the dark, as if watching him, waiting. Inside, the barn smelled of old hay and oil, with a trace of something metallic that never seemed to fade. Jack flicked the light switch, but the bulb overhead gave only a weak glow. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by his steps. He made his way to the corner, to the wooden chest he had avoided for years. Its metal latch was rusted, the wood warped from seasons of damp. Jack crouched and brushed dirt away with the back of his hand. For a long moment, he didn't move. His breathing slowed, steady but shallow, like Cole's. He could hear the faint whistle of wind outside, the distant creak of the weather vane turning. He pressed his palm to the chest lid, and memories surged, the smell of burnt grain, the frantic shouting, the terrible silence after. He had locked those moments away the same way he had locked this chest. With a reluctant pull, the latch gave way. Inside lay tools, gloves, scraps of rope, all layered with dust. And buried beneath them, small and out of place, was a flip phone. Its casing was scratched, the plastic yellowed with age, but Jack recognized it instantly. It had belonged to his younger brother, Ben. Jack's stomach tightened, as though he'd swallowed a stone. He lifted the phone carefully, like it might break apart in his hand. The weight of it was far more than its plastic and circuits. It was the weight of guilt. Jack pressed the power button, half expecting nothing, but the screen flickered, weak and stubborn, still alive after all these years. One message notification glowed. A voicemail, dated the day of the accident. Jack's thumb hovered over the button. His chest ached, the memory as sharp as the day it happened. The smell of hot metal, the roar of the silo auger, Ben's voice calling out as he rushed into the grain to clear the jam. Jack had been at the controls. He had been the one who pulled the lever, the one who realized too late. The phone shook in his hand. He snapped it shut, shoving it back into the chest with a force that rattled the tools. Dust flew, stinging his eyes. Jack slammed the lid closed and stood quickly, chest heaving. He couldn't listen. Not now. Maybe not ever. The barn seemed to close in around him, walls pressing, air thick. He stumbled back toward the door, his boots loud against the wooden planks. Outside, the night air was colder, but it didn't soothe him. He leaned against the barn wall, staring at the stars overhead. His breath clouded, fading as quickly as it appeared. He thought of Ava's words, her calm certainty. They carry more of us than we like to admit. Cole was carrying this silence, this refusal, this weight. And Jack hated her for being right. A faint sound drew his attention. Cole shifted in the corral, struggling slightly, then settling back down with a tired groan. Jack's throat tightened. He walked slowly toward the fence, resting his arms along the rough wood. The horse's eyes found him in the dark, unblinking, patient. For a moment, it felt as if the animal was waiting for him to choose, to open the door fully or to lock it tighter. Jack stayed there until his legs ached, until the chill soaked through his coat. Finally, he turned back toward the farmhouse, his shadow long and thin under the moonlight. He left the chest closed, the phone inside still carrying the voice he couldn't bear to hear. Inside the house, the kitchen was as he'd left it. The plate, the bottle, the silence. Jack lowered himself into the chair, elbows braced on the table, head in his hands. He hadn't listened, but the message played anyway, looping in his mind. The words he imagined Ben might have said, words he wasn't sure he could survive hearing. And somewhere in the corral, Cole exhaled, a slow and steady breath, as though reminding Jack that silence had its own price. Morning came slow, draped in a haze of pale gray that softened the lines of the fields and barns. Jack Miller had slept little, his eyes red-rimmed from staring at the ceiling, until dawn finally crept through the curtains. The kitchen smelled faintly of stale coffee, the pot still half full from the night before. He rinsed his face at the sink, letting cold water shock him, awake, though it did little to clear the heaviness pressing against his chest. Outside, the land was quiet, the cornstalks rattling softly in the breeze like dry bones. A knock startled him. Sharp, quick, impatient. Jack opened the back door to find a boy standing there, his hands jammed into the pockets of a threadbare jacket. Noah Price, the neighbor kid, 15 years old, skinny as a fence post, with hair that refused to stay combed and eyes too old for his age. His mother worked nights at the diner off Highway 6, and his father was somewhere up in North Dakota, chasing oil fields. Noah often wandered over when the house grew too quiet. "Morning, Mr. Miller," the boy said, voice uneven with the effort of sounding casual. "Mom said I should see if you needed help." Jack frowned, pulling the door wider. "Help with what?" "Anything. Feeding, cleaning stalls, whatever." Noah's gaze flicked toward the corral. Cole stood near the fence, his head low but upright. The horse's black coat glistened faintly with dew, steam rising from his nostrils in the cool air. "I heard he went down yesterday," Noah added carefully. "Figured you might need an extra set of hands." Jack hesitated. He wasn't one for charity, and the thought of letting someone else near Cole tightened something in him. Still, the boy's face held a mix of eagerness and worry, and Jack found himself stepping aside. "Don't get in the way," he muttered. They walked to the barn together, boots crunching frost-hardened soil. The smell of hay and dust drifted around them as Jack slid the stall door open. Cole flicked his ears, wary but curious, his dark eyes resting on the newcomer. Noah lingered just outside, shoulders tense, as though one wrong move might shatter the moment. Jack handed him a small bucket of grain. "Hold it steady," he instructed. "Don't shove it in his face." Noah obeyed, stepping slowly into the stall. His breath fogged in the air, mingling with Cole's. The horse hesitated, then stretched his neck, lips brushing the rim of the bucket. Noah's smile appeared quick and unguarded, his entire frame loosening as Cole began to eat. For a few seconds, the barn filled only with the sound of chewing and the soft rustle of hay. Jack leaned against the post, arms crossed. The sight stirred something he couldn't name. Cole had been distant even with him these past weeks, but here he was, easing forward to a boy he barely knew. The horse's eyes softened, his ears angling forward, accepting. It wasn't much, but it was more than Jack had expected. "Feels different," Noah whispered, glancing back. "Like he's letting me in." "Don't get used to it," Jack said, though the words came without heat. After the bucket was empty, Noah lingered, hand hovering near Cole's neck. Jack almost barked at him to stop, but he bit it back. The boy reached out gently, fingertips brushing the sleek coat. Cole twitched, but didn't pull away. His breath came steady, warm against Noah's sleeve. The boy's grin widened, his eyes shining with something Jack hadn't seen in years. Hope, raw and unfiltered. Jack cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "That's enough for today." They walked back toward the house, the sun climbing higher, burning mist off the fields. Noah shoved his hands into his pockets again, but his step carried a new spring. "You think he'll get better?" he asked. Jack didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted back to the corral, to the black figure standing still against the morning light. The question wasn't about the horse, not really. He exhaled, slow and hard. "We'll see." As they reached the porch, the sound of a truck engine rolled up the drive. Ava's silver pickup. She stepped out, notebook in hand, her expression unreadable as she glanced at Noah, then Jack. "You let someone else close to him," she said quietly, as though she had been watching from afar all along. Jack stiffened. He opened his mouth to deny it, but Cole's low nicker carried across the yard, giving him away. Ava's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment Jack thought he saw approval there. It unsettled him more than disapproval ever could. Jack turned away, muttering under his breath, "Don't make more of it than it was." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Something had shifted. Not just in the horse, but in him. A boy's hand on the reins had done what his own silence never could. Offered Cole a reason to lean forward, not back. The day moved on, but the image stayed with Jack long after Ava left, long after Noah wandered home. Cole lowering his head, Noah's hand steady, the quiet trust between them. It felt fragile, like the first crack in a frozen river, but beneath it ran something powerful, unstoppable. And Jack Miller, for the first time in years, was afraid of what might break free when the thaw came. By the time the sun dipped again toward the horizon, the air had turned sharper, carrying the bite of late October that whispered of frost. Jack had spent most of the day in silence, fixing a loose hinge on the chicken coop, patching fence posts along the north pasture. He worked until his hands stung, until the ache in his shoulders drowned out the memories clawing at him. Work had always been his only defense. Keep moving, keep your head down, let the day run you ragged until sleep came heavy. But when he returned to the yard, he found Miguel crouched by the tractor, a socket wrench in his hand, and a grin tugging at his weathered face. "This old beast won't start herself," Miguel said, wiping grease onto his jeans. "Figured I'd give her a try. You're behind on winter prep." Jack's jaw tightened. He hadn't asked for help. Still, Miguel had been walking onto this property since they were boys. Friendship wasn't something you needed to invite. It just showed up, like a stray dog that never left. The smell hit first. As Miguel turned the ignition, the engine coughed and spat, belching smoke that carried the acrid tang of burnt oil and hot steel. Cole, tied nearby in the corral, flinched. His ears shot back. Nostrils flaring, Jack's eyes snapped toward him, instinct pulling tighter than any rope. "Easy, boy," Jack muttered, stepping closer to the fence. But Cole's muscles quivered, his hooves scraping against the dirt. The engine rattled again, louder this time, the grinding of gears sharp as broken glass. It was a sound Jack knew too well. His chest constricted, breath shallow. He saw the grain silo again, the flash of Ben's jacket disappearing into the choking dust, the metallic scream of machinery just before the silence swallowed everything. His hand trembled against the fence post. Cole let out a sharp, panicked snort, lunging back until the rope went taut. "Kill it!" Jack barked. Miguel turned the key, and the engine shuddered to silence. The smoke lingered, curling through the air like ghosts. Jack climbed over the fence and stood beside Cole, pressing both hands against the horse's neck. The animal's heart hammered beneath his touch, wild and desperate, mirroring the frantic rhythm in his own chest. For a long minute, neither man nor beast moved. When Cole finally steadied, Jack exhaled through gritted teeth. He glanced over the fence, his glare landing hard on Miguel. "Don't do that again." Miguel lifted his hands, grease blackening his palms. "Jack, the snow's coming. You need this equipment working. You can't keep shutting it all down every time a memory creeps up." "Leave it," Jack growled. His voice was low, dangerous, but beneath it lay something brittle. Miguel studied him for a long beat before setting the wrench down with a clank. "It's not just you anymore. That horse is tied up in it too. You keep pretending you can outwork the past, but he feels every damn bit of it." Jack didn't answer. He kept his hands on Cole's neck, fingers tangled in the black mane. The horse's sides rose and fell in shallow bursts, eyes still wide with the residue of fear. The stench of metal smoke clung to Jack's nostrils, making him want to gag. He turned away, leading Cole back into the barn. Inside, the air was cooler, gentler, carrying the earthy scent of hay. Jack stroked Cole's flank, whispering under his breath, words he barely understood himself. Not your fault. Not your burden. The horse leaned into him, weight pressing as if to say otherwise. Later, when Jack stepped out, he found Ava waiting by her truck. She must have driven in quietly, unnoticed in the chaos. She stood with her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the barn where Cole had disappeared. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing," Jack said too quickly. She tilted her head, unconvinced. "I smelled it down the road. Burnt oil, metal smoke." Her gaze cut to his. "That smell. He'll never forget it, Jack. Neither. Will you?" He wanted to deny it, to shove her words back into her throat. But his chest still burned with the memory, and the horse's tremble still clung to his skin. He shoved his hands into his pockets, turning away. "You don't know a damn thing about it," he muttered. Ava didn't press. She simply nodded once, like a doctor who already knew the diagnosis, even if the patient refused to hear it. She opened her truck door, pausing before climbing in. "You'll have to face it, or you'll both keep braking." Her engine started, taillights glowing red as she pulled down the gravel road. Jack watched until the dust settled back into the silence. He returned his gaze to the barn, to the shadow moving inside. Cole shifted, letting out a low, unsettled breath. Jack leaned against the fence, the cold sinking through his jacket. He closed his eyes, but the smell lingered, the ghost of hot metal, the sting of smoke. He pressed his forehead to the wood and stayed there until the stars blinked awake overhead. Thanksgiving arrived with a thin coat of frost blanketing the pastures. The dawn was pale and reluctant, as though the sun itself hesitated to rise over the Miller farm. Jack spent the morning in silence, moving through chores with mechanical precision, feeding chickens, hauling water, scattering hay for the cattle. Each motion was a habit carved from decades, but the weight of the day pressed heavier than the cold. For most of the county, the holiday meant laughter spilling from crowded kitchens, pies cooling on window sills, and the scent of roasted turkey weaving through homes. At the diner in town, families gathered in booths, the smell of pumpkin spice thick in the air, credit card machines ringing steady with holiday cheer. But here, at the Miller farmhouse, the table remained bare until late afternoon. Jack finally set a place for himself out of duty more than hunger. A small turkey breast from the grocery store sat in a foil pan, cooked but cooling too fast in the drafty kitchen. A bowl of mashed potatoes, pale and lumpy, joined it. He poured a cup of coffee instead of wine, the steam rising faintly before fading into the cold air. Across from him, 3 chairs stood empty. June's, Ben's, and the one that should have belonged to a child he and June never had. He lowered himself into the chair with a sigh, the wood creaking beneath him. The silence of the house was unbearable. He lifted his fork, stabbed half-heartedly at the potatoes, and chewed without tasting. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and merciless. He thought of the years when June would hum while basting a turkey, when Ben would slip in from the barn smelling of hay and mischief. Back then, the table had been small, but it had never felt empty. Now it was wide as a prairie, and he was stranded at its center. Outside, Cole shifted in the corral. Jack's eyes wandered to the window where the horse's dark silhouette stood against the gray sky. The animal hadn't touched his grain since morning. He seemed to wait, motionless, ears tilted as if listening for something that wasn't there. Jack pushed his plate aside and rose. In the barn, the air was cool and smelled of straw and wood shavings. Cole's head lifted when Jack entered, his eyes catching the dim light. Jack approached slowly, hands loose at his sides. He stroked the horse's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the sleek coat. "Guess it's just us," he murmured. Cole blinked, exhaling softly, as though answering in kind. Jack stayed there, leaning against the stall door, the weight of memory thick around him. He thought about Ava, about Miguel, about Noah, their voices still echoing from days past, urging him to face what he had buried. He thought about the chest in the barn corner, the flip phone inside, the voicemail unopened. The weight of it pressed on him even now. His stomach turned, and he left the barn, returning to the kitchen. The meal had cooled completely, congealed into something unappetizing. He sat again, staring at the food. His hands tightened around the coffee mug, knuckles whitening. The clock ticked louder. He pictured June's wind chimes on the porch, swaying gently in some other Thanksgiving years ago, laughter spilling into the evening. The knock at the door startled him. Jack rose, slow and cautious, and opened it to find Noah standing there again, cheeks flushed red from the cold. The boy held a paper plate covered with foil. "Mom sent me," Noah said, eyes darting past Jack into the empty house. "Said you shouldn't eat alone." Jack hesitated. His instinct was to refuse, to push the boy away before kindness dug deeper into wounds he wasn't ready to expose. But the smell wafted from the plate, stuffing, sweet potatoes, a slice of pie. The scents carried him back decades, to dinners crowded with family. He swallowed hard. "Tell your mom thanks," he said, his voice rough. Noah nodded, then shifted awkwardly. "Mind if I say hi to Cole before I head back?" Jack studied him for a moment before stepping aside. "Don't take too long." As Noah hurried off toward the barn, Jack lingered at the door, watching. The boy's figure was small against the dusk, but Cole lifted his head the instant Noah approached. Ears pricked forward. Jack felt a pang, a mixture of jealousy and relief, that the horse seemed to welcome the boy so easily. Back inside, Jack uncovered the plate. He sat once more at the long table, the boy's gift before him. He ate slowly this time, the flavors stirring echoes of meals long gone. When he finished, he sat back in the chair, hands folded in his lap. For the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. The house was still quiet, but outside, faintly through the walls, he heard Noah's laughter mingling with Cole's gentle snort. It was a sound that didn't belong to him, but it carried into the hollow spaces nonetheless. Jack closed his eyes and let it fill the silence. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the sky was a slate-gray canvas. The next it split open, thunder cracking across the flat Iowa land like a rifle shot. Jack had been dozing in his armchair when the windows rattled. He jolted upright, the memory of another storm long ago clawing at him, June's laugh echoing in the kitchen as rain hammered the roof, Ben sprinting in from the barn, soaked and grinning. The house tonight held no such laughter, only the hollow groan of wind against the siding. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, stepping out into the night. Rain slapped his face, cold and relentless, soaking through his jacket in seconds. The fields were ghostly under the storm, lightning streaking across the horizon, illuminating cornstalks bowed and broken. The wind carried a sharp scent of wet earth, mixed with something metallic and bitter that set Jack's nerves on edge. From the barn came a frantic thudding, hooves striking wood, a panicked whinny. Jack's gut clenched. Cole! He sprinted across the yard, boots sliding in mud, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The barn doors rattled as if the storm itself were trying to tear them off their hinges. Jack shoved them open, the light revealing chaos inside. Cole reared against his stall, eyes rolling white, body slick with sweat, though the air was cold. His mane whipped like a flag in the storm-drenched drafts seeping through the roof. "Easy, boy," Jack shouted over the roar of rain on tin. His voice cracked, desperation cutting through the storm. He slipped inside, shutting the doors halfway behind him, though the wind still howled through every gap. He moved slowly toward the stall, his flashlight falling to the straw as he raised both hands, palms out. Cole slammed against the boards, nostrils flaring, breath coming ragged. The thunder rolled again, so loud it seemed to shake the very ground. Jack flinched, heart hammering. He knew the horse wasn't just reacting to weather. The sound carried something darker, a memory imprinted in muscle and bone, just as Jack carried his own. He forced his breathing steady, dropped the flashlight entirely, and sank to the straw floor. The cold bit into his knees, the damp seeping through his jeans. He remembered something June once told him, long before the losses piled up. "If you want trust, meet them where they are." Jack sat low, making himself small, level with the horse's wild gaze. "Hey," he whispered, barely audible above the storm. "It's just me." His voice trembled, but he kept going. "It's Jack. It's always been me." Cole's head tossed, hooves pawing furiously. Jack closed his eyes, knowing words alone weren't enough. So he did the only thing left to him. He sang. The melody was broken, raw from disuse, but it came. An old country tune June used to hum when she worked in the garden. The words stumbled, but the sound filled the barn, weaving with the thunder in fragile defiance. Jack's voice wavered, but he didn't stop. Cole's ears flicked. His movements slowed, uncertain. His breath still came heavy, but less frantic. Jack kept singing, eyes shut tight, his chest aching with every note. The storm raged, but inside the barn, a small shift began. The horse stepped forward, one hoof pressing carefully into the straw. Jack opened his eyes. Cole's head had lowered, nostrils flaring as though trying to place the sound. Jack extended a hand, palm open, his song dropping to a hum. For a suspended moment, man and horse stood on the edge of something fragile, something that could collapse with the next clap of thunder. Then Cole took another step, then another, until his muzzle pressed against Jack's shoulder. His breath was hot and damp, carrying the sharp tang of fear slowly giving way to something else. Recognition. Jack's throat closed. He stopped singing, leaning into the touch, his hand sliding up to Cole's neck. The tremors still ran through the horse's muscles, but he wasn't fighting anymore. Instead, he leaned back, as if allowing Jack to bear some of his weight. The storm battered the roof above them, rain spilling through cracks, dripping cold down Jack's back. But he didn't move. He stayed there, grounded by the feel of the horse's breath, the steady thud of a heart beginning to slow. "You're not alone," Jack whispered. The words were for Cole, but they landed inside himself as well, echoing in a place he had kept locked for too long. Minutes passed before the storm began to ease, the thunder rolling further east, the rain softening to a steady patter. Cole stood calmer now, ears flicking at the sound of Jack's voice, his head still pressed close. Jack's shirt clung to his skin, chilled and heavy, but he didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt needed. Truly needed. Not by land or debt or ghosts, but by this living creature that mirrored his own scars. When the storm finally broke into silence, Jack rose slowly, brushing damp straw from his knees. Cole followed him with his eyes, a quiet steadiness replacing the earlier panic. Jack reached out, giving the horse's muzzle one last stroke before retrieving the flashlight. As he stepped back into the night, the sky was clearing. Stars blinked between tattered clouds, and the air smelled clean, washed new. Jack looked once more at the barn before heading toward the farmhouse. He knew tomorrow would bring the same struggles. Debts, silence, the unopened phone in the chest. But tonight something had shifted. He hadn't planned it, hadn't asked for it, but in the midst of thunder and fear, Cole had leaned on him. And in that moment, Jack had leaned back. The morning after the storm broke clear and brittle, the ground still damp with puddles that mirrored the pale sky. Jack rose stiffly from his chair, every joint aching as though the thunder itself had pressed into his bones. He moved through chores in silence, but his mind stayed fixed on the barn, on the way Cole had leaned against him through the night. The memory steadied him for a moment, but by noon, reality arrived in the form of a beige sedan kicking up gravel in his drive. Dana Whitfield stepped out, crisp as a ledger sheet. Her coat was tailored, her heels too fine for the mud, but she moved with the certainty of someone who never worried about slipping. She carried a slim briefcase, its leather polished and sharp against the washed-out November light. "Mr. Miller," she called, adjusting her scarf as she approached the porch. Jack set down the feed bucket in his hand, wiping his palms on his jeans. "Dana." His tone was flat, neither welcome nor hostile, just worn. She climbed the steps, pulling papers from the briefcase. "I won't take much of your time, but the bank has been patient long enough. Your loan is 90 days overdue. Winter's coming, and carrying non-performing accounts into the new year isn't an option." Jack's jaw worked as he stared past her at the barn, where Cole shifted in the corral, ears twitching. He wanted to walk away, to shut the door and leave her words to scatter in the wind, but he forced himself to meet her eyes. "I told you I'd make good on it. And I told you promises don't keep the lights on." She held out a sheet for him to see, neat columns of numbers lined with merciless clarity. "You have 30 days, Jack. 30. After that, the bank will be forced to pursue liquidation." The word struck like a hammer. Liquidation. It wasn't just land or equipment. It was Cole, the barn, the last threads of his family's life woven into this soil. He swallowed hard, the taste of rust in his mouth. Dana's gaze softened slightly, though her voice remained firm. "I don't want to see you lose everything. Selling that horse would cover a third of what you owe. It would buy you time." The suggestion cut deeper than the threat. Jack's fists tightened at his sides. He pictured Cole in some stranger's pasture, eyes dulled, carrying someone else's weight. The thought made his chest burn. "No," he said, the word rough, final. Dana tilted her head, studying him. "You've always been a stubborn man. Stubborn doesn't pay bills." She slid the paper onto the porch rail and closed her briefcase with a click. 30 days. I'll be back." Her heels clicked across the boards, sharp against the quiet. Jack watched her drive off, the sedan shrinking down the road until only dust remained. He picked up the paper. stared at the numbers, then crumpled it in his hand. The sound of Cole's whinny carried across the yard, pulling his eyes back to the corral. The horse was restless, pacing along the fence, head tossing as if he sensed the storm brewing inside his owner. Jack crossed the yard, shoving the paper deep into his pocket. He leaned against the fence rail, watching Cole's muscles ripple under his dark coat. The horse stopped, turned, and stared at him with that steady, unblinking gaze. Jack spoke before he could stop himself. "They want me to sell you." His voice cracked. "They think you're just a number on a page." Cole snorted, pawing the ground, the defiance in his stance almost human. Jack let out a bitter laugh. "Guess you're stubborn too." Behind him, footsteps approached. Miguel had come by, grease still on his hands from the garage. He studied Jack's face, then the horse, then the crumpled paper peeking from his pocket. "Bank giving you trouble?" Jack didn't answer. Miguel sighed, leaning against the fence beside him. "I've seen this before. They circle like vultures. You think you're just fighting for dirt, but you're fighting for your own skin." He looked at Cole, then back at Jack. "Don't let them take him. He's more than land, more than debt. He's the piece of you that's still alive." Jack closed his eyes, the weight pressing heavier than the sky itself. He wanted to believe Miguel, wanted to believe strength alone could hold back the tide. But the paper in his pocket burned like a brand, reminding him of the 30 days ticking away. That night, Jack sat at the kitchen table long after dark, the numbers still haunting him. Cole's steady breathing drifted faintly through the window from the barn. Jack folded his arms on the table, pressed his forehead to them, and whispered into the silence, "I can't lose you too." The words hung heavy, unanswered, as the farmhouse groaned against the winter wind. The first frost of December left the fields glittering like glass. Jack rose before dawn, his body stiff but restless, as if sleep had been too fragile to hold him. He made coffee, black and bitter, and drank it at the window while the farmyard lay under a pale wash of light. From the barn drifted the sound of coal shifting, the creak of boards beneath his hooves. Jack closed his eyes, clinging to that sound like a lifeline. But reality pressed harder with each sunrise. The bank's 30-day notice sat folded in his coat pocket, the weight of it growing heavier with every passing hour. He avoided looking at it, avoided the words stamped across the top. Notice of default. He avoided Ava's eyes when she stopped by, her quiet questions about Cole's progress more than he could stand. And he avoided Miguel's blunt warnings, though they rang true. "So long as you keep hiding, Jack, it'll all come crashing down." That morning, Miguel returned, bringing tools. "We've got to start these machines before they seize up for the season," he said, voice low but insistent. "Snow's coming. You'll need them ready." Jack shook his head, tightening his grip on the coffee mug. "Not today." Miguel set the toolbox on the porch with a thud. "There's no not today. You can't just let them rot." The two men stared at each other, silence strung tight as barbed wire. Finally, Jack relented with a grunt, the fight draining out of him. He followed Miguel to the shed where the tractor and baler waited, hulks of rust and steel sleeping in the cold. Dust coated every surface. The air smelled of old oil, of forgotten labor. When Miguel twisted the key, the tractor sputtered awake, coughing smoke into the air. The sound was jagged, grinding, merciless. Cole's scream pierced the yard a heartbeat later. Jack whipped around, blood freezing. The horse had bolted against the corral fence, eyes wide, muscles quaking as though the world itself were collapsing. Jack's chest seized. The memory roared back, violent and unstoppable. Ben's body swallowed by a cascade of grain, the shriek of machinery overhead, his own hands pulling the lever too late. He stumbled forward, his vision tunneling, lungs clawing for air. "Jack!" Miguel shouted, slamming the tractor off. The engine shuddered to silence, but the damage was done. Jack collapsed to his knees in the dirt, his palms digging into frozen soil. His breath came ragged, his chest burning. Cole trembled across the yard, nostrils flared, breath clouding the air in frantic bursts. Man and horse mirrored each other, caught in the same storm, their pasts converging in the present like a noose. Miguel crouched beside Jack, gripping his shoulder. "You can't keep doing this," he said fiercely. "You break every time the machines start. And now he breaks too." He pointed toward Cole, still quaking in the corral. "That horse is carrying your ghosts. You think you're protecting him, but you're feeding him the same fire that's burning you alive." Jack's head dropped, sweat mixing with cold rain still clinging from the ground. He wanted to deny it, to shove the truth back into the shadows. But the sight of Cole, knees buckling as though he might go down again, was undeniable. Jack forced himself to stand, his body trembling with exhaustion. He crossed the yard, stumbling to the corral, and pressed his forehead against the horse's mane. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice raw. "I'm so damn sorry." Cole's breath steadied against him, still fast but no longer frantic. Jack gripped the rope, holding on as if it were the only thing keeping them both upright. Behind him, Miguel watched in silence, his face lined with worry but softened by something like compassion. When Jack finally turned back, his eyes were red-rimmed, his voice hoarse. "Every time I hear it, it's like he's there again. Ben, shouting, then nothing, and His words broke. He swallowed hard, staring at the machines looming in the shed. "I killed him, Miguel. My own damn brother." The admission cracked the silence open, sharp and brutal. Miguel shook his head slowly. "No. The accident killed him. You've been carrying blame that was never yours to bear. And now that horse is breaking under the same weight." Jack clenched his fists, shoulders rigid. He wanted to fight the words, but the truth pressed too close. He glanced back at Cole, the horse's dark eyes meeting his, steady but weary. For the first time, Jack saw not just fear, but reflection. His own pain mirrored back at him. The wind shifted, carrying away the acrid smell of smoke, leaving only the clean bite of frost. Jack exhaled, long and heavy, as if something inside him had cracked wide open. That night, the farm was still. Jack sat in the barn on a bale of hay, Cole resting beside him. The machines stood silent in the shed, their shadows long across the yard. For once, he didn't try to bury the memory. He let it come, sharp and searing, and he let the tears fall. Cole lowered his head, pressing close, as though standing guard against the ghosts that haunted them both. In the quiet, Jack whispered the words he had refused for years. "I can't do this alone anymore." And in the horse's steady presence, he felt, for the first time, the faintest hint of release. The December nights had grown longer, stretching over the farm like a heavy shroud. Jack sat in the barn well past midnight, a lantern flickering on the post beside him. The air smelled of hay and wood smoke, faintly sweet but edged with cold. Cole dozed nearby, his breath rising in soft clouds, each exhale visible in the frigid air. Jack leaned forward on a hay bale, elbows braced on his knees, the unopened flip phone resting heavy in his palm. For weeks it had burned a hole in his chest, hidden in the bottom of that old trunk. Now, after his collapse before the machines, he could no longer pretend it wasn't there. Miguel's words echoed. "That horse is breaking under the same weight." And Ava's voice lingered too. "They carry more of us than we like to admit." Jack rubbed the phone with his thumb, tracing the scratches that told their own story of years gone. His heart pounded. Every part of him wanted to snap it shut again, bury it back under tools and dust. But another part, the part that had crumbled on its knees in the dirt that morning, whispered that it was time. He pressed the button. The screen flickered. Weak, but alive. One voicemail. The date glared back at him, the day of the accident, frozen in time. His throat tightened until it felt like he was swallowing stones. For a long minute, he stared at the phone, paralyzed. Then, with trembling fingers, he pressed play. The voice came through, cracked with static, but unmistakably Ben's. "Jack," it began, rushed, breathless, as though spoken in a hurry. "Don't blame yourself. You hear me? If something goes wrong, and it might, I went in because I wanted to, because I trust you. You've always kept this farm alive. Don't let it die with me." Jack's breath caught. The sound of Ben's voice was like a blade sliding between his ribs. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear, eyes burning. "I know you'll carry it," Ben continued, his voice breaking, "because that's who you are. But you've got to let go sometime, Jack. For June, for yourself. And if you can't, then find someone who can remind you what living feels like. Don't waste it. Don't waste the land. Don't waste yourself." The message ended with silence, the kind that roared louder than thunder. Jack sat frozen, the phone trembling in his hand. His brother's words carved through the years of guilt, through the silence he had built like walls around his heart. Cole stirred, shifting in the straw, his eyes half open. Jack's gaze fell to the horse, and in that instant, he understood. Ben had been right. The burden he had chained to himself had not only broken his own body, but had been pressing on to Cole as well. The horse was carrying it, mirroring it, breathing it. Jack lowered the phone, pressing it against his chest as if holding on to Ben himself. Tears spilled freely, cutting hot tracks down his face. His voice cracked into the stillness. "I killed you in my mind every day since. But you never blamed me. And I can't keep doing this." Cole lifted his head and let out a low nicker, deep and steady, as though answering. Jack rose slowly, crossing to the stall, and laid his forehead against the horse's warm neck. The steady rhythm of Cole's heartbeat bled into his own, a grounding force. "You knew," Jack whispered. "You've known all along." The horse exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing what had been held inside for years. Jack closed his eyes, breathing in the musky scent of sweat and hay, letting himself believe, if only for a moment, that Ben's voice had come not from a machine, but from something still alive in this place. Later, he sat again on the hay bale, the phone resting on the table beside the lantern. He didn't hide it away this time. He left it in the open, its silence no longer a threat, but a presence. The barn creaked softly as the wind shifted outside. Jack leaned back, his hands folded across his chest. He felt drained, emptied, but in that emptiness there was something else, Space. The kind that could be filled with more than grief. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future where the farm wasn't just a monument to loss, where Cole wasn't just a mirror of pain, but a partner in survival. The night carried on, still and endless. Cole dozed again, his breathing deep and even. Jack stayed awake, listening, holding on to the sound like a tether. He knew the road ahead was far from clear. Dana's deadline, the looming winter, debts that couldn't be wished away. But for the first time, he felt like he had a voice beside him. Ben's. Cole's. His own, no longer locked behind silence. When the lantern finally guttered out, Jack whispered into the dark, "I heard you, Ben. I heard you." And in the stillness of the barn, he swore he felt his brother's voice ride the wind, lighter than sorrow, stronger than fear. The morning after Jack listened to Ben's voice, the farm felt strangely altered. Nothing had changed on the surface. The fences still leaned, the fields still wore their frost, the debt still loomed heavy. But inside Jack, something had shifted. For the first time in years, the silence of the house didn't crush him. It simply was. He brewed coffee and sat on the porch, watching Cole graze along the fence line, his breath puffing in white clouds against the cold. The horse moved more easily, not fully free of weariness, but steadier, as though the night had lightened him too. By mid-morning, Ava's truck appeared on the road, its tires crunching frozen gravel. She stepped out with her usual quiet authority, clipboard in hand. "How's he doing?" she asked, nodding toward Cole. Jack rubbed his chin, his breath steaming in the air. "Better, I think." Ava studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes catching more than he wished. "And you?" He gave a short laugh without humor. "I finally listened to Ben." The words felt foreign leaving his mouth, but lighter too. Ava's gaze softened. She didn't ask what the message said. Didn't need to. Instead, she nodded toward the barn. "Sometimes healing isn't about medicine. Sometimes it's about truth finally spoken." Before Jack could reply, Miguel's truck pulled up, engine rattling. He climbed out, slamming the door against the cold. "I hear the bank's deadline hasn't changed," he said, no preamble. "What's your plan, Jack?" Jack exhaled. He had avoided the answer for too long, but Ben's voice had left no room for running anymore. He glanced between his two friends, then toward Cole, who stood watching as if he too waited for the verdict. "I'm not selling him," Jack said firmly. The words were low but resolute. "Not the land, not the horse. I've spent too many years burying what matters most. I'm done running." Miguel's shoulders dropped, relief mingling with worry. "Then we fight. But you can't do it alone." Ava nodded, stepping closer. "There are grants, programs for community agriculture and therapy. If you're willing to open the farm, let people in. You can keep both the horse and the land." Jack's jaw tightened. The idea of strangers walking his fields, touching the fences Ben had built, unsettled him. But then he looked at Noah, who had wandered in from the road, his jacket too thin for the cold. The boy waved, his grin wide as Cole nickered in recognition. That image, Cole leaning toward the boy, trust blossoming where Jack thought none remained, answered for him. "Then we open it," Jack said, his voice steady. "Not for money. For survival. For him. For all of us." Miguel grinned, clapping him on the back. That's the Jack I remember. Ava smiled faintly, though her eyes shone with something deeper. It's never too late to stay. Later, as the sun sank, Jack walked the property alone. He paused at the old oak tree where June's wind chimes hung silent in the winter air. The sun's metal tubes clinked faintly when the breeze stirred, carrying echoes of her laughter. He touched the chimes gently, then looked out over the land, the soil that had taken so much, but also held everything he had left. Cole approached quietly from behind, nudging his shoulder. Jack turned, resting his forehead against the horses. His voice came in a whisper, fragile, but sure. We're staying, boy. Whatever it takes, we're staying. The horse let out a low breath, warm against the cold. Jack felt it ripple through him, grounding him in a way no paper from the bank ever could. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, the bank's notice spread out before him. He didn't shove it in a drawer this time. He wrote across the bottom in rough, uneven script, "I'm not leaving." Then he pinned it to the wall above the sink, where he would see it every day. A promise, not to the bank, but to himself. For the first time in years, Jack climbed into bed and slept through the night. No machines, no collapsing silos, no ghosts clawing at the door. Just the steady rhythm of Cole breathing in the barn, and the echo of Ben's voice reminding him that staying was not failure. It was the beginning of something new. The December sun broke weakly through a veil of clouds, spreading thin light across the frozen fields. Jack pulled his collar high against the wind as he walked toward the barn, a coil of rope in one hand. Cole lifted his head from the hay, ears flicking forward, his breath rising in pale plumes. The horse seemed calmer these days, steadier. There was still tension in his muscles, but it no longer held him captive. Waiting by the barn door was Noah, a wool cap pulled low over his ears, his cheeks pink from the cold. He shifted from one boot to the other, nervous energy spilling out of him. "You sure it's okay?" the boy asked, nodding toward Cole. "Him and me?" Jack studied him for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "As long as you listen." Ava stood nearby, her hands tucked into her jacket, watching with the quiet patience that seemed to unnerve Jack more than her sharp words ever did. Miguel leaned on the fence, arms crossed, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. The four of them made a strange assembly: doctor, mechanic, farm boy, and grieving farmer. But somehow, together, it felt right. Jack led Cole into the open yard, the snow crunching beneath hooves. He handed the rope to Noah, who held it gingerly, as though it might bite. "Don't pull," Jack instructed. "Guide. Keep your shoulders loose. Let him see you, feel you." Noah swallowed hard, but nodded. He stepped forward, rope in hand. Cole shifted, uncertain at first, but didn't bolt. The boy's movements were clumsy, hesitant, yet something in his face softened. A mixture of awe and responsibility. Cole's ears flicked back, then forward, testing. Jack held his breath. "Talk to him," Ava said gently. "Not with words. With your body." Straightened, adjusting his stance, his shoulders squaring like he'd seen Jack do. Cole responded with a slow blink, his steps evening out as he followed. The sight tugged at something deep in Jack's chest. "Good," Jack said, the word rough but sincere. "Keep him steady." The lesson lasted no more than 15 minutes, but by the end, Noah's confidence had grown. He walked Cole in a slow circle, the rope slack between them, trust forming in the quiet rhythm of their movement. When he finally stopped, the horse stopped too, lowering his head slightly as though acknowledging the boy's effort. Noah turned, eyes wide, a grin splitting his face. "Did you see that?" Jack's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Yeah, I saw." Cole shook his mane, sending snowflakes scattering. Jack stepped closer, patting the horse's neck. "You did good, boy," he murmured, words meant for both of them. Miguel let out a low whistle. "Never thought I'd see the day you let anyone else take those reins, Jack." Jack shot him a look, but didn't deny it. The truth was, something about the sight, Cole responding to Noah's hesitant trust, had cracked the ice that still clung inside him. Ben's words from the voicemail echoed in his head. "Find someone who can remind you what living feels like." Maybe this was it. Maybe it wasn't about holding on so tightly that nothing could change. Maybe it was about opening a door, even just a little. When the lesson ended, Noah handed the rope back reluctantly. "Can we do it again?" he asked, his voice hopeful. Jack studied him, then nodded. "Tomorrow, same time." The boy's grin widened. "I'll be here." As Noah hurried off down the road, his breath puffing white against the gray sky, Jack stood in the yard with Ava and Miguel. Cole grazed quietly nearby, his dark coat gleaming against the snow. For the first time in a long time, the farm didn't feel like a graveyard. It felt like something alive, something worth protecting. Ava spoke softly, breaking the silence. "He's not just learning about horses. He's learning about you." Jack frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She smiled faintly. "That trust goes both ways." Jack didn't answer, but as he walked Cole back to the barn, he felt the truth of her words settle deep in his chest. The farm still carried its weight, debts, deadlines, memories, but today, in the simple circle of a boy guiding a horse, he had glimpsed a piece of what Ben had wanted for him. Life, not just survival. That night, when Jack sat at the kitchen table, he found himself writing in a small notebook Ava had left behind. The words came awkwardly at first, uneven and spare, but they came. He wrote about Cole, about Noah's grin, about the way the horse's breath fogged in the cold. He wrote not for the bank, not for the world, but for himself. For the brother who had trusted him. For the wife who had believed in him. For the boy who had reminded him how to try again. When he set the pen down, the silence of the farmhouse didn't feel as sharp. Cole's steady breathing drifted faintly from the barn, and outside, the snow fell soft and relentless, blanketing the land in quiet promise. Snow fell steady on Christmas Eve, softening the hard lines of the farm into something almost tender. The fences wore white caps, the barn roof sagged under the weight, and even the rusted machinery looked gentler beneath its blanket of snow. Jack Miller shoveled a path to the barn, his breath clouding the night air, lantern swinging in his hand. The farmhouse behind him glowed faintly, a single string of lights hanging along the porch. Noah had insisted, and Jack hadn't argued. Inside the barn, Cole stood calm, his black coat dusted with flakes that melted into his mane. The horse lifted his head as Jack entered, ears flicking toward the sound of boots on straw. Jack set the lantern on a post and leaned against the stall, studying him. "Tomorrow's Christmas," he said softly, as if the horse might answer. Cole exhaled, warm breath rising in the cold air, steady as a promise. By evening, the farmyard had filled with unexpected life. Pastor Luke had stopped by, his old station wagon loaded with hymnals and casseroles. Miguel arrived with his wife and 2 daughters, carrying laughter that spilled like heat into the frozen night. Ava came too, unannounced, bringing a thermos of cider that steamed sweet with cinnamon. And Noah, of course, arrived bundled in a coat too big for him, grinning as though the whole farm belonged to him. They gathered in the yard near the barn, a circle of lanterns casting gold against the snow. Pastor Luke led a hymn, his voice rough but earnest, the words drifting up into the night sky. Others joined quietly, their voices weaving together until the air itself seemed warmer. Jack stood apart at first, his hands buried in his coat pockets, but gradually the sound drew him in. He found himself humming under his breath, the tune carrying him back to years when June's voice had filled their small kitchen, when Ben's laughter had carried over the fields. Noah tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Miller, can I try? Just for them?" He pointed toward Cole, who stood watching the gathering with quiet curiosity. Jack hesitated. The crowd, the lanterns, the sound of voices. It was more than Cole was used to. But he saw the boy's face, bright with hope, and nodded once. Slow, gentle. Noah approached the horse, rope in hand, his steps sure despite the snow. Cole flicked his ears, shifting slightly, but he didn't retreat. The boy lifted the rope, guided him into the circle of lantern light. A hush fell over the group as the black horse stepped forward, his dark coat gleaming against the snow, his breath puffing like smoke. Jack held his breath. A stray gust rattled the lanterns, and Cole's muscles tensed, but Noah steadied him with a soft hand and a quiet word. The horse blinked, then relaxed, his head lowering. A ripple of awe moved through the small crowd. Pastor Luke smiled. A lesson for us all. Even the most burdened can walk steady if someone believes in them. Jack's throat tightened. He glanced at Ava, who caught his eye, her look saying what she didn't need to speak. That someone includes you. The hymn rose again, this time stronger, voices carrying over snow-covered fields. Cole stood calm in the lantern glow, Noah at his side, the boy's hand resting gently on the rope. Jack felt something inside him loosen, a knot he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. When the song ended, laughter followed, gentle, unforced. Miguel passed around steaming cups of cider. Ava's smile warmed the edges of the cold, and Noah's eyes sparkled like he'd just been handed the whole world. For a moment, Jack let himself be part of it. He accepted the cider, the laughter, the presence of people who weren't family, but felt like it. Later, when the others left, Jack returned to the barn. Cole stood waiting, ears pricked forward. Jack stepped into the stall, resting his hand against the horse's neck. "You did good tonight," he whispered. Cole leaned into his touch, his body solid and steady against the winter chill. Jack stayed there long after the lantern burned low, listening to the quiet. The farm was still, the stars sharp above, the snow deep and clean. For the first time in years, Christmas Eve didn't feel like a hollow ache. It felt like a gathering place, of voices, of trust, of something worth holding on to. The first week of January brought a cold so sharp it seemed to crack the air itself. Jack pulled his coat tighter as he walked up the steps of the town hall, boots striking against the stone. The building stood squat and weathered on Main Street, its flag snapping stiff in the wind. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and paper, warmed by old radiators that hissed like irritated snakes. The hearing room was already full. Farmers in worn flannel and battered hats filled the benches, their faces lined with fatigue and frustration. The county board sat at the front, a row of stern figures behind a long oak table, their papers stacked high like walls between them and the lives they judged. At the edge of the room, Dana Whitfield from the bank sat with her briefcase, her expression neutral but watchful. Jack took a seat near the back, Cole's presence still clinging to him like a second skin. He had left the horse in the care of Noah for the morning. Reluctantly, but with a trust that surprised him. Now, as the murmurs of the crowd ebbed and the meeting came to order, he felt the weight of more than debt pressing on him. This was about water rights, about survival, about whether the land that had carried his family's name for generations would still carry it come spring. The chairman droned through reports and numbers, the language of policy stripped of flesh and bone. Farmers spoke in turn, their voices rising with anger or breaking with fear. Words like allocation and restriction cut through the air. But behind them lay fields that might not grow, families that might not stay. Jack listened, his jaw tight, his hands clenched in his lap. When his name was called, the room shifted. He stood slowly, feeling the eyes of the town on him. Some sympathetic, some skeptical, some eager for him to fail. He walked to the front, boots echoing against the floor, and stood before the board. "I'm not here to argue numbers," Jack began, his voice rough but steady. "You've got plenty of those already. I'm here because this land isn't just mine. It's my brother's sweat in the soil, my wife's laughter in the wind, my own mistakes carved deep into the fences. And now, it's a boy named Noah learning how to hold a rope steady, and a black horse that carries more of me than I ever admitted." A murmur rippled through the room. Dana leaned back in her chair, studying him with sharp interest. "I've spent years thinking silence was strength," Jack continued. "Thinking if I just worked harder, kept my head down, I could carry it all. But I was wrong. Silence nearly killed me. Nearly killed the horse I swore to protect. What we need, what I need, isn't charity. It's a chance. A chance to stay. To use what's left to build something that isn't just about surviving another winter, but about giving back." He paused, his breath clouding faintly in the cold room. "You want to see accountability? Come to my farm. See the programs Ava's starting with me. See Miguel fixing the barns. See Noah finding a place to belong. We're not just holding on to dirt. We're holding on to each other. If you cut that off, you're not saving water. You're cutting the lifeline of people who've already lost too much." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The board members shifted, uncomfortable. Pastor Luke, sitting near the front, gave a quiet nod, his hands folded as if in prayer. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, this is highly irregular testimony, but—" He glanced at his colleagues, then back. "We'll take your words into consideration." Jack inclined his head, then stepped back. As he returned to his seat, he caught Dana's eye. For once, her expression wasn't cold calculation. It was something more complicated. Respect, maybe, or the faintest glimmer of doubt. The meeting dragged on, filled with debates and figures. But Jack barely heard. His chest felt raw, scraped open, yet lighter. He had spoken the truth aloud, not just to Cole in the dark barn, not just to himself, but to the world that had stood watching him unravel for years. When the session adjourned, Jack stepped outside into the biting wind. Snowflakes spun in the air, stinging his cheeks. Miguel joined him, clapping a hand to his shoulder. "You did good in there," he said. Jack shook his head. "Doesn't mean they'll give us what we need." "No," Miguel agreed. "But it means they heard you. And sometimes that's the start." Across the street, Noah waved from where he stood holding Cole's rope. The boy had brought the horse into town, a boldness Jack hadn't expected. Cole stood tall despite the strange surroundings, his black coat stark against the snow. Jack crossed the street, his boots crunching, and took the rope from Noah's hands. The horse leaned close, exhaling into the cold. Jack pressed a hand to his neck, whispering, "We said we'd stay. And we will." The wind whipped harder, rattling the flag above Town Hall. Jack lifted his eyes, squinting into the pale sky. For once, he didn't feel small beneath it. He felt steady, rooted, like the oak tree on his land. Whatever the board decided, whatever the bank demanded, he had already made his choice. He wasn't leaving. The verdict from the county board came a week later. A letter arrived, plain and official, edges damp from snowmelt where it had slipped through the mailbox. Jack stood on the porch holding it, the cold seeping into his fingers. He didn't open it right away. For once, the outcome felt secondary to the decision he had already made. Stay, fight, and rebuild. Whatever words lay inside could not change that. Instead, he looked out over the land. Snow stretched across the fields like a blank canvas, clean and waiting. The air smelled of cedar and cold iron, the kind of winter air that cleared the lungs. Cole stood by the fence, head lifted, ears pricked forward as if sensing something new. His body looked stronger now, his movements surer, though the scar of fear lingered in the tight flick of his tail whenever machinery clanked in the distance. Jack finally tore the envelope open. The words blurred at first, his breath fogging the page, but the meaning came clear. A reprieve. Water allocation granted for one more season, a chance to prove the land could still give. His chest loosened. He folded the letter carefully, slid it into his pocket, and walked toward the barn. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of hay. Noah was brushing Cole's coat, his strokes even and careful. The horse leaned into the touch, eyes half closed in contentment. When the boy noticed Jack, he straightened. "They say we got another season?" Jack nodded. "We did." Noah grinned, his face alight. "Told you it'd work out?" Jack chuckled, a sound rusty but genuine. "Maybe you did." He reached for the brush, finishing a stroke down Cole's neck. "But it wasn't the board that gave us this chance. It was him. And you." Later that day, Jack walked to the oak tree at the edge of the yard, the one where June's wind chimes still hung. Snow crunched beneath his boots, the air so still he could hear the faint creak of branches overhead. He stood for a long moment, the chimes frozen quiet, their silver tubes glinting in the pale light. With careful hands, he untangled the ice, nudging them until they swayed. A soft note rang out, clear and delicate, carried on the wind. Cole wandered up behind him, breath steaming in the cold. Jack rested a hand on the horse's neck, eyes lifting to the chimes. "She used to say the wind carried our voices higher than we could reach," he murmured. He let the sound linger, each note dissolving into the sky. Noah joined him, his small boots crunching the snow. He tilted his head at the chimes. "Sounds like someone answering back," he said. Jack's throat tightened. He looked down at the boy, then back at the horse, then up at the sky. "Maybe it is." That evening, as dusk settled, Jack sat at the kitchen table with a notebook open before him. Ava had given it to him weeks ago, and tonight he filled its pages, not with ledgers or debts, but with memories. June's laughter, Ben's last words, Noah's first ride, Cole's steady breath in the storm. He wrote them down as if pinning them to the earth itself, a record not of loss, but of endurance. When he finished, he set down the pen, listening. The farmhouse creaked in the wind, but it no longer felt empty. Outside, Cole shifted in the barn, his presence steady. The chimes rang faintly from the oak tree, soft and persistent. Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the sounds fold into him. The farm had not been saved by miracles. It had not been spared by pity. It had endured because he had finally chosen to stay, to speak, to trust. The scars remained, in him and in Cole, but scars were not weakness. They were proof of survival. Jack rose, pulling on his coat, and stepped outside. Snowflakes drifted slow and silent, settling on his shoulders, his hat. He walked to the barn, where Cole waited, ears flicking at his approach. The horse stepped forward, pressing his head gently into Jack's chest. Jack wrapped an arm around him, his breath catching in the cold. "We made it," he whispered. The words carried into the stillness, rising with the chimes that answered faintly across the yard. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Miller believed it. If this story touched you, let me know by leaving just a simple 0 or 1 in the comments. I read every single one. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next story may be the one that stays with you forever, just like this farmer and his black horse.